Andrew and our conversations from the get-go were to create a look that was classical but still timeless in a sense. And so I think for period movies, you want to find that fine line between it feeling vintage and appropriate, because a lot of our perception of the past is sort of baked into the media we consume from that era, but keeping it sort of modern in an approachable way, but not going so far that it's sharp and brightly saturated and more what you could say digital looking. So a lot of the muted palettes comes from a desire to keep it rooted in the period.
Hi, I'm Gordon Burkell from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can learn more at filmmakeru.com or, of course, follow us on Instagram at filmmaker_u. Every week, we interview a film professional to discuss their work, and this week, I'm joined by Idan Menin, whose work recently included the shooting of Lost on a Mountain in Maine for Sylvester Stallone's production company. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Gordon. Nice to meet you. Thanks for having me.
I guess my first question is, how did you get involved with Lost on a Mountain in Maine?
Yeah, Lost on a Mountain in Maine came to me through my agent, sort of in the traditional way. I got sent the script, and I read it and immediately connected with the material, connected with the themes, and as a avid sort of student of history and especially mid-century American and world history, it connected to me on it connected with me on many levels. And so I called my agent up and said I got to interview for this. It's checking all the boxes. I was absolutely excited, and started working on the lookbook like that night. And thankfully we got an interview, and I met Andrew Kightlinger, the director, and we became fast friends. Sort of the best scenario where we connected on creative levels, emotional levels, and just personalities really jived.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, you're an avid camper, or you loved camp.
Yes, yeah.
So, was there something from your camping experiences that you were able to bring in terms of the look and feel of the film?
Yeah. I think something I'm known for in my previous work, and I think this is tied to my love of camping, is natural light and sort of being put in scenarios where we have sunlight, we have moonlight, we have fire. These are sources that I'm very closely connected to because I go backpacking. I spend a lot of time outdoors. And, the thing about camping, part of the draw for me is that you have a lot of time on your hands. You get to disconnect. And I spend a lot of that time sitting there and observing light. And I think that's been a consistent sort of occurrence on a lot of the films I've done have been period pieces where you are limited in that way. Lost in a Mountain in Maine, it's 1939, so obviously there's electricity. That being said, they're up in rural Maine, and at that time, even to this day, some of those ranger stations still just operate on kerosene lanterns. Um, so yeah, being outside, being an outdoorsman, definitely allowed me, I think, to see the film in a visual way that was appropriate and also exciting. It's totally my bread and butter. I think it was really important to Andrew that the team he brought on were down to get in the dirt and tread through the rivers and sort of get in the elements.
I sort of got into VFX by accident. I always had a technical interest in photography and especially as it relates to movie making. There's something magical about the ability to believe something is happening when it isn't. So I went as a live action producer into a company called Bob Abel and Associates. Then I would have to, have a meeting about how do we do this effect that's in this commercial, and I never got the straight answer I was looking for. I have camera knowledge, so it's like, since it's kind of ambiguous, why don't I just grab a camera and we'll try it out. You have to figure out what tells the story and use every trick in the book to solve your problem. I am Rob Legato, and this is my course on visual effects.
Well, and it's also got like a muted palette. What was the decision behind that?
I think regarding the visual style, Andrew and I, our conversations from the get-go were to create a look that was timeless, classical, but still timeless in a sense. And so part of that is, I think for period movies, you want to find that fine line between it feeling vintage, um, and appropriate, because a lot of our perception of the past is sort of baked into the media we consume from that era, and but keeping it sort of modern in an approachable way, but not going so far that it's sharp and brightly saturated and you know more, I guess, what you could say digital looking. So a lot of the muted palettes, I think, comes from a desire to keep it in rooted in the period.
You talked about how the media we consume sort of helps dictate our impression, I guess, of the past. So like when you put together your lookbook, did you basically were like, okay, we're only going with old brownie camera photos and like stuff like that, or like what'd you
No,
do for your lookbook to get that look?
yeah, not necessarily. I definitely tend to pull a lot of. So when it comes to inspirations, I like to draw from a multitude of sources. I think there's a danger in just pulling movie stills. It kind of limits your ability to sort of just imagine something kind of from scratch. So there are a couple evergreen sources that I pull from, and Sebastian Salgado is a photographer I really admire. Lillian Bosman, who I think appropriately her work was around that era. She was pretty prominent in the 50s and 60s, and then painting as well, because of the natural lighting environments, whether it's fire, kerosene, moonlight, daylight. Rembrandt and Caravaggio are really evergreen sources to pull inspiration for that. So it's sort of a collection of different eras, um, but always keeping in mind, like one of the references we had a couple movie references, but they were sort of all over the place because Andrew and I both we love really big scale epics and blockbusters, and we also love very small, intimate dramas. I always tell people that sort of the if I only could watch one movie, it would be The Fellowship of the Ring. But then the next one on the list is Short Term 12. Completely opposite sort of type of film. So our references on the movie side were wide ranging. That being said, we did have a couple period references. I remember sharing some stills from Carol because of that's 16 millimeter, and granted we shot digitally and we were going for more of a 35 millimeter look, but nonetheless the texture of that period and how it was presented was relevant, and so and that film also has like a relatively controlled color palette akin to ours. I think the other note I'd have about our color palette, I think would tie to the fact that we wanted a very like clear trajectory for Don's journey visually. Um, and a lot of that had to do with sort of the warmth of and safety of being at home and all the colors that come with that. Why the Fendler house has a lot of oranges and yellows in the production design and the costuming. And then when we get out in the wilderness, obviously during the day exteriors, we have like, hot weather contrasted by really cold nights. But overall, sort of the color palette trends cooler when he's alone and when he's dealing with the elements.
My next question was going to be then, how did you tackle the storm scene? Because like the whole film is sort of set up by that.
Yeah, that was an incredibly integral. It's sort of the linchpin of the movie, and we identified that early on. And the key piece to that was sort of breaking it down into a bunch of mini sequences, just for the logistical purpose of how do we pull this off, especially a film of our size. Um, I think before I get too deeply into that, the weather in general is just like a constant almost antagonist in the film, and an element that's what sets the mood in a really big way. And from the get-go, we knew we wanted to just smoke out the forest every day of production. And that was a big conversation of what, it's all scales, film production, especially independent cinema. And so for us, it was a large conversation. Okay, what are some of the things that we can do without, so that we can guarantee we have an SFX team with us. We're able to create the weather environment that sort of sets the mood for the film. But going back to the mountain, we broke it down into, here are the location pieces. So here's what we can accomplish in upstate New York. What out here doubles for the mountainside, um, and how far does that get us? And so we found that got us through the hike. That gets us up the mountain a little bit. So when Don's father and him and his brother and Harry, when they part ways, that's on location. And that was just really good locations work from our locations department, finding a place. I think it was called the Mohonk Preserve. That area had a very similar sort of topology, and we were blessed with like the perfect weather circumstances to accentuate what we were doing on an SFX side. And so that got us to the point where they separate. And then they have to keep going, and the elevation change and the weather gets more intense. And we knew really early on that the mountaintop and the midway parts were going to be stage. And so then the conversation became, how do you pull that off in a believable way? And there was a lot of back and forth. I think visual effects plays such an incredible role, especially now in filmmaking. But where possible, you sort of want to find ways to do things in camera, and then allow visual effects to supplement or enhance instead of it being sort of the main character. And so for us, we elected to build the sets on stage. Darcy Scanlon, our production designer, and her team did an incredible job. And the script said they halfway up, they can see barely 10, 15 feet in front of them. And so that was a really clear cue to me that we could surround the stage environment in gray muslin and fill the place with smoke. And and that also allowed us to control the density of the smoke. Instead of doing it outside, we're sort of at the whim of the wind for that day. And it allowed us to install pretty heavy duty rain rigs and wind control. And so we did it that way. We did it practically, and visual effects came in to accentuate, do a little bit of cleanup work where the smoke was kind of patchy, and to remove some elements of the stage when you get really low angle and you start to see the softbox and things like that. That was our main approach. And then the final sort of cherry on top was sort of our second unit, additional photography of Katahdin itself. And that involved aerial footage of the mountain, and visual effects plates that were captured at the actual mountain peak.
Because you mentioned that in the film, obviously the weather is an antagonist. But did you guys have any issues with the weather while you were shooting? Like, was it your own antagonist in the
I gotta
shooting?
say, it was an antagonist in the sense that I think my camera assistant, probably lost like a year of his life in stress just keeping the camera dry. But I think what was so funny about this film is that bad weather in any normal circumstance, me and the director lit up. We were excited. If it was rainy, if it was pounding down on us, if it was overcast, it was perfect for us. That's sort of what we're looking for. And I think it's sort of the flip on this one, where if it had been sunny the whole time, I would have been having a panic attack through the movie.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's definitely a complication. Rain makes production harder. Uh, that's just how it is, and especially when we're in remote locations and rugged terrain, a good deal of mud and things to slow us down. But we had a really dedicated and hardworking crew, um, and so we were able to get through it. But it was definitely sort of the inverse. Like, if the forecast was horrific, I was smiling my whole way to set.
So what was your knowledge of the original? Because it's based on a true story. So how much did you know going into this? And like, did you read the book beforehand, or what happened?
Um, so I was not familiar with the story, so I was truly enamored reading the script, considering being told it was based on a true story from the get-go. So as I read it, I was really taken aback at the story and the perseverance of Don Fendler. And in terms of reading the book beforehand, I chose not to, um, and I think that was a good decision. I think that I've since read it.
Mhm.
I wanted to go into the film with just the script as my guide and no sort of predetermined ideas of what it should be or our authenticity. I wanted to make sure that I could sort of follow Andrew's lead, who was very well versed in the true story and has met the Fendlers, and Ryan Cook, our producer, who knew Don well. I wanted to sort of take their cues, take their lead, and then bring to it sort of what I think was the most important, or bring sort of my perspective on what I think is like the defining theme of the movie, and the sort of the undercurrent of the film. Because even though it's a survival film, and we're watching this young man just face really sort of scary adversity. For me, based on something Andrew would say over and over again, the film comes down to this is a story about a boy who wants a hug from his father and a father learning to say, I love you. And that was something Andrew said very early on, and it all just clicked from there. And it also made me understand a little better why I connected to the film so strongly reading it. Because that's a definitely, I think, a very universal theme. I don't think there's anyone on the planet who can't connect to that in some way. Maybe it's not your father, maybe it's your mother or your brother, your sister, but this sort of idea of connection and community was the defining sort of undercurrent of the film.
Probably one of the smartest things I've ever done for my career. It gave me all the tools that I needed to be able to jump into a new career.
Getting myself into a mindset, thinking like an editor, and being around people that I can talk to on that level was really invaluable to me.
A lot of the things that I learned from that class, I still think about.
I loved the classroom. I loved the computer stations. We built a sense of community.
And it also instills a lot of confidence in you to take that and go out into the world.
After I took the class, I felt very prepared to take the next step.
I owe Manhattan Workshop the career that I have right now. Things have been going great, and I really have the Manhattan Workshop to thank for that.
When I was reading through your bio and reading things, from other interviews and what have you, I found that the quote that you like to add your adding emotional perspective to visuals, and I'm wondering if you could sort of elaborate on that.
I think at its core, and I'm stealing this quote, heard Barry Jenkins say this, and maybe he got it from somewhere else. But I think at its core, cinema is an empathy machine. That is its most powerful tool, and that can be used for really nefarious purposes. You can see with propaganda films from the early days of cinema, and it can be used for really impactful good at the same time. I think movies allow us to connect with people who are like us, who are unlike us, see perspectives that we perhaps were hesitant or resident to look into. And it connects us as humans. It can take the worst people, the best people, and just boil them down to being human beings. And that's something really important to me. And visually, I think that is the role of a cinematographer. It's to identify the emotional core of a project. Every decision you make, every decision you take, every step an action you take, should be in support of that, should be underlining that. I think sometimes we can be seduced by what looks pretty or what's in vogue or in fashion. And I think it's a disservice to the role of a cinematographer or a production designer, or it all should lead with the emotion of the film, because we're subconsciously affecting people, really.
So I have one last question. What would you say is your favorite guilty pleasure film or TV show to watch?
I would say that I love watching dramas and period pieces and action films and all that stuff. But when I just need to relax, when I need to just, after a long day, sit down and take it easy, um, any Mel Brooks movie is a winner for me. And so I think early on I saw Spaceballs. I saw Spaceballs before I saw Star Wars, oddly enough. And that has always had a really close place in my heart. And then as far as TV shows go, I I think It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia is just
Oh, it's a
magnificent.
great show.
Yeah, absolutely incredible series.
Well, thank you so much for letting me interview you today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
And that's it for this week, everyone. Make sure to check us out at filmmakeru.com or, of course, on Instagram at filmmaker_you. I'm Gordon Burkell. Thanks for watching.